solar, you're probably in most cases will have to have that transferred. So it's a little bit different than some of these formats that we're going to be working on today. But if it was new construction and you're working in that, the solar form itself changed in 12 of 25. So it's called solar. If you have not closed on a solar transaction involving a home, then you do need to review that. That form moved to 2 pages. Originally, it was two separate. One was the advisory, and then the separate one was a questionnaire. Now they've included both of those, so there are currently both on the same form. So when you bring it up, you will get both pages. A lot of good information. You working as an agent. We do not advise as far as solar is concerned. We do provide the forms, but in most cases, you're always going to be referring the client to the solar company. Very seldom there would be an exception. The way you would be working in this format would be basically trying to secure the information that needs to be provided to the title company for the transfer. And but you do need to have some basic understanding of the different type of solar formats that are out there. And the main reason behind that is they're handled differently. We're going to be discussing that today. I did send out today the information for that's in training today. Uh, Feel free to always use that. It's good information when you have a solar situation where you have solar on the house. Just review it and it give you the basic information. The information I'm providing you today is just basically an outline for the training program, but it does provide the necessary information for reference purposes if you needed to look at it. The most common solar financing options that we have, the purchase of a solar system with a loan, that's where the customers purchase that. That one we'll be discussing. It can be a little bit problematic as far as transfers are concerned. Hero and Hope financing is basically tied to the property taxes, and those were in play early on. Really, about 7 or 8 years ago, they were popular. They were local based, and most of the cities were allowing it. Most of the cities do not allow that any further to go on to tax basis. So we're not seeing too much in that arena. Actually, in the past 12 months, I've only seen one. So at one time, we saw quite a few. So if you do run across anything that has that type of financing, and that's what it is, it is financed by a private company. The rates they charge are a little bit exorbitant. So when we're working with that type of program, it generally will have to be paid off. We've attempted a couple assumptions on those, but never been successful. So if you do see it, my recommendation to you is just simply pay, get it paid off and move forward. Otherwise, it's going to drag out. They have a tendency. The one that we did do in the past 12 months, it took us almost 90 days to facilitate it and close it. They're just difficult. Leased on solar systems. That's the most common one you will see. It When people are having it installed on their home, or it will be the power purchase agreement, one of the two. Now, the one that involves the purchase of the solar system, we're seeing more of that involving new construction. And basically what happens is that currently, if you really look out there, some of the incentives is being created by new construction. They are offering the minimum solar system, and that's included in the purchase price, where in the past it wasn't. So we're seeing more of that, but you could still see on new construction, you could see the leased or the power agreement. But that you just have to weigh that when you see the solar that's on the property, then you're going to have to research that. My recommendation, if you're the listing agent, do it at the time of listing. Don't wait on that. Get the information from the client. Most of the information the clients will provide you with is generally not the total signed documents. It's generally the initial one that they have in their possession, but that's all that's necessary. It gives you the basic information so you can work with the power company. The the leased solar system is actually owned by another individual party, and you're simply leasing it. And most of these are for 25 to 30 years. I have seen a 20-year one, but most of the time they're trying to keep it at 20. The reason why they're pushing those out is it has to do with the payments. The power purchase agreement, that particular system is not owned. That's just strictly put on there by the power company that's going to be providing the power. And so that all of that equipment and everything on the premises belongs to them. Basically, what the customer's doing is purchasing power. They're purchasing power from a private company. So the power comes off of it, then the power company just simply sends it back to you. And a lot of people say, well, how do you figure, how do you get your bill? Well, your bill that comes through, it could be in the geographical area we're working in is either PG&E or the Southern California Edison Company. And what happens is the customer, once they get the power system placed on the property, they reach out to the Edison company or PG&E. They're generally about a 5 to 7 page format, and basically is just saying how they're going to simply do the transmission of power. And that's what you're seeing. So it's pretty straightforward document. There's a lot of verbiage in it. It has to do with California uh, um, guidelines that these power companies have to provide. The new systems that we're seeing out there is basically battery backups. That does not take into consideration the new construction. New construction is historically not using batteries because of the expense and the cost related to it. I mean, if you wanted to put it on, you're buying a new house, that'd be fine. But basically, what they're installing today is if you're seeing them being installed in the last 24 months and you're dealing with a transaction involving it, historically it will have a battery backup. The reason why that's come into play and it's being installed almost on every home, it has to do with the rebate program. The rebate program now includes battery backups, but before the changes took place here about a year ago, the rebates were tied to the panels themselves. So that's the reason why you're seeing it, and that's the reason why they're marketing in that direction. The problem with it is cost. Battery backups can be quite expensive, so you're seeing these power systems being put on these houses, and then you're trying to transfer it through a close of escrow on a house that's been purchased. It starts to get expensive real quick. Listing and buyer agent understanding the transfer process of solar. You as the agent, you will have to understand the process, because if you don't, you're going to get to close of escrow and then you're not going to be able to transfer. You're not going to be able to transfer the property. Some people think that they don't have to worry about it because the salespeople that sold them the solar told them, don't worry about it. It's not going to be a lien against the property. It's actually, unless you do you're buying the units, then yes, that's a lien, but they just misleading. They have another agreement that is filed, and that involves personal property. Provide a copy of the agreement to the MLS. very important. When you list the property and you have solar, and be always look at the roof. I had a situation here a few months ago where the solar panels were not visible from the front of the house, and the agent didn't realize that it had solar. Client never mentioned it, but the solar was all located on the rear of the home, and so it created a problem when we got to the close of escrow. So we had to try to facilitate some of the things that needed to be taken care of, and of course the solar companies have 30 to 45 days to put the transfer documents in place, and unfortunately it created a delay in the closing. Provide My suggestion to you is always put it in the attachment section. Go ahead and get a copy of the document, put it in the attachment section in the MLS so the other agent has it immediately. After the fact issues are harder to work with when you're working with a client that's interested in purchasing a home. If they have the solar information in front of them at the time they do the agreement, and you get an acceptance, it's going to flow much easier, and it's going to cut down the resistance. Um, Solar is misunderstood in most cases, and so it's important to get that document in front of the clients, see if they have concerns about it. Sometimes we're seeing some payment issues that are quite substantial. These things can get anywhere from $150 to four or $500. It just depends on the amount of panels that are on the property. Know if the system is owned, leased, or it's a power purchase agreement. You have to, that's the basic things that you need to know. It's in the document. Once you have a copy of the document, you know what you're dealing with. But when you place it in the MLS, just don't reference what it is. And you can, there's nothing wrong with it as long as you know what it is. In other words, you have a copy of the document and it's stipulating what it is, and absolutely put it in the agent comment section, or you could put it in the other comment section. Determine if the system can be transferred to a new buyer. Review the contract and see transfer of property section to the new buyer, or contact the solar company. It's usually on a page. It's usually I finding when I'm reviewing these, it's usually on like page 11 or 12. It's kind of in the middle part of the document. It depends on how many pages that are involved, but it will tell you how the transfer will take place, and if it can be done. And then later on in this meeting, I am going to talk to you about specific situations with specific different types. The seller to provide authorization to the buyer to contact the solar company. Solar company will not talk to the buyer in most cases, and I haven't seen too many exceptions to that, excuse me, without authorization from that seller. So that's when you get the seller, when you're listing the property, the seller needs to make contact with the solar company to find out who to reach out to and provide authorization for buyer to talk to them. If you want to talk to the solar company, then you would also need authorization. But the most important thing is really about the buyer. The buyer needs to contact them so they understand what they have being placed on the roof of the property. The solar transfer are buyer and seller's responsibility. It's not the escrow company. And unfortunately, it's these mistakes are made, and it creates a delay in the closing of the escrow. So it's very important that both buyer and seller get on top of this solar situation right away. And part of the process that's being missed here is that the agent is not providing the solar contract for review. And so If you're the buyer, my recommendation to you is try to get a copy of it prior to writing an offer on the property. If you're the listing agent, you should have that in your possession and probably have it attached in the MLS so that everybody has that particular day one. And so because the timelines is a 17-day normally on inspections of the properties and accepting leases and so forth. Provide copy of the buyers to the lenders. It's very important that they have that information. And the main reason behind that is we're seeing some questionable activities being done by solar companies involving some very dilapidated properties that have solar systems on the top of them, and they have exorbitant costs tied to them, and it starts impacting whether the purchaser can purchase the property and also take on that particular type of financing depending on the property. Lease solar systems. Generally, the lease is transferable. I haven't really run any problems with it. They stipulate in their form that you have to approve they have the right to approve the FICO score, which they do. Early on, when I was starting to work with this, they were actually turning down a few people. I've seen one turn down probably in the last 12 months, but it's not normally going to be the case. There's generally something going on that's creating a problem. And because if you can qualify for financing, then the FICO score will not be an issue. They do stipulate anywhere from, depending on the contract you review, between 600 and 680. I've seen a 700 with specific companies, but if the property is being financed, it's generally not an issue. The issue comes into play where somebody has got a bad, really an ugly FICO score, and they're trying to buy a house for cash, and it creates a problem. The seller to contact leasing company for instructions on how to transfer the lease. The lease is what you're trying to do with the lease situation is take the seller out of primary liability. So that's what that form is going to entail. And then the person has to take over the obligation. These leases are generally about between 20 and 25 years. Um, I'm not saying that there is not a 30-year one out there. I've seen a couple of them, but most of them are around 25 years is where they accumulate. And then have the buyer contact the leasing company for additional information. The leasing company will talk to them if they have approval. The transfer documents will be provided to the escrow prior to close of escrow. So the escrow can reach out to the solar company to get those documents. But my recommendation is that you reach out to both the escrow company and the solar company to see who is going to take care of that. So everybody has an understanding, And the UCC1 is security agreement attached to the property. That is the document that when they're out selling solar, they say, oh, no, we're not going to put a lien on the property for a lease. No, we don't do that. They, unfortunately, they forget to say that, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to have a security agreement attached to the property. It is in their paperwork and it's there. It's just people don't understand what that is. And so it's and that you can't transfer the property when you have that in play. That's the main reason you're doing the lease documents. So can you move me to the next page, please? Thank you. Hope and Hero financing is an interesting situation. We see it in solar. Now, Hope or Hero financing could be used for various things. It could have been used for windows. It could have been used for air conditioning units. So when you see that, you're going to see it appear on the property tax bill. So when you get a preliminary title report from the title company, it's going to it's going to identify it. And we had a situation where it actually wasn't identified there, but it was identified on the tax rolls, but that was generally an exception. There's two ways for the property owner to deal with this type of situation. We'd have to know how they're handling it. If it's on the property bill, they can have it in an impound account, or they could just be paying it when they're paying the taxes. But most people have it in an impound account, so it's being paid through there. Those will have to be paid off. We've never had any success with getting those transferred. We had one time where we tried it and it just took forever to make it work. So it's very problematic. The companies want those paid off, and that's the main reason is, and it's a lien against the property. So the bottom line on it is if you're putting a loan on the property, it's not going to work. Now, if somebody's paying a property with cash, that's a different scenario. But if there's any loans involved, then you're going to have to address it and deal with it. Verify enough equity to pay off the loan at close of escrow. Very important. Somebody said, well, why is that such a big deal? It's when the property was purchased. If the property was purchased prior to 2019, it's probably got sufficient equity. And as we all know, what happened in the recent years is that the property valuations doubled in some areas and in a lot of the areas. If that property was in play in 2018, there's plenty of equity in the property normally, unless it was a refinance took place in, maybe 21 or 22, and they pulled all the equity out of the property. So in most cases, it's not going to be an issue. But if the property was acquired by the seller within the past 3 years, it can be a problem. So you have to be extremely careful with this and you make sure. And it doesn't make any difference if you're dealing with a Hope, Hero financing or purchase, any type of purchase that went on involving the solar system. In most cases, it will have to be paid off. The owned solar systems, they're a unique situation in themselves, and clients are saying, "Well, I got a solar system; it's paid off." In most of our transactions, we're finding that the solar system is of course always making a payment on the loan, and you have to check with the title company for any liens involving solar systems on the property. They need to be paid off at closing. Now, exception buyer is paying cash for the property. It becomes irrelevant at that time if they're willing to take over the payments. Here's where it starts to get a little bit sketchy. Customer puts a solar system on the property and they put a lease system on it. They come back at a later date and then they add additional panels or created a second system on the property. And when they do that, there's two systems. So one could be a purchase and one could be a lease. So what has to happen, what I'm finding working with this particular type of situation, it's not that common, but if you run across it, the purchase one needs to be paid off. The lease one can be transferred. And as you're seeing, working with solar, it's not as easy as one thinks it is. So you have to understand what you have when you're working with it, because we're starting to see more solar systems that have upgrades or additional systems. In other words, they have two on the property. So the clients kind of, they don't tell us, or we find out, unfortunately, the hard way. And so just make sure we understand what we're dealing with. And that's where that solar form becomes so important if they have two different solars. What we see involving some of these systems is that they're deteriorating at the 10-year mark and they're not performing at the level that they thought they should. And so solar companies are coming out and doing, basically what we see as upgrades or redoing the contracts or, they're doing all kinds of various things. So we have to have some awareness of what's going on. So when you ask for anything from the client and you know the solar system has been in place for, let's say, 10 years, you're going to have always the solar form itself is going to bring it out, but you need to ask the additional questions. Have you done any additional panels being placed on the roof? And if you've done that, sometimes there's a new contract that's in play and you want to make sure you get the correct one. Seller completely owned systems. Here's Have them complete the solar advisory questionnaire. It's called solar. And I've attached it to the information today. If you did not receive it, let us know and we'll be more than happy to send it out to you. Or you can pick it off. You can get off zip forms. I mean, it's not a big deal. You just bring it up and it gives you all the information you need. If the seller is still making the payments, we have to get a payoff statement. It's just like you get a payoff statement on a loan for a house. We have to know what the balance is due on the loan. That sometimes can take a little bit of extra time. In most cases, it's taking about 45 days, but we can get them in 30. We just have to get on it right away. The Somebody said, well, can you transfer that to a new buyer? It depends on what type of the situation is. We found here in California, there's a company that's actually out of Oregon that did some of these solar systems, and they were basically with Sunrun. And those solar systems had a loan on them. But that particular company we've been working with them on more than one and been able to transfer them. So it's really about checking with Sunrun if you see that situation and find out, well, can this be transferred? Otherwise, these are simply going to have to be paid off. We've not found any other company that's willing to do it. And the main reason is most of those interest rates are around 2.5 to 3%. And to be honest with you, they want their money back because they can reinvest it at a much higher rate. Is enough equity in the property? We talked about that earlier. And somebody said, well, why do you keep discussing that if you happen to call? It's because you can't get your commissions out. The most important thing that I could ever do for you is help protect your commissions. So that's the main reason that we want to know exactly what's going on with that. Buyer and seller may agree to pay off the solar. And somebody said, well, you know, does the seller always have to pay it? No, I've seen cases where the buyer's paid half of it and the seller's paid half of it. But an agreement has to come into play. So that's why it's so important to understand what you're dealing with when you list a piece of property. If you're the listing agent, you have to find out what the seller is willing to do, if they're willing to pay it off. You need to know it up front. They're willing to pay it off or they're going to pay so much on it, then we're going to have to roll over to the buyer to see if they have a willingness to do it. Now, what we're seeing today in the real estate market, which all of you are currently working out in there, is that there is a problem out there we don't have the cash buyers as we used to. We have basically FHA and VA financing seems to be the major player out there on first-time home buyers. And so it's you have to understand what you're dealing with. Does does that buyer have sufficient funds to do that? And in most cases, they don't. They're just going in with minimum down. And so just have awareness because what we're dealing with in today's market, everything is being negotiated. And we have to be good negotiators to facilitate these transactions and close them. Buyer and seller may agree to pay off, it's great. And then you're got it paid off and then you're good to go. Power purchase agreement. There's two different types. There's a power purchase agreement or there's a power purchase lease. Make sure you understand what you have. Uh, they're somewhat similar, but there's a difference in the two. The power purchase agreement, it's when you're dealing with it, generally the it takes 5 years before somebody could do a payoff on it. And the power purchase lease is just simply a transfer. Power purchase agreement can be transferred also, but the only thing that's really different about the two is it has to do with that 5 year timeline. Generally, it can be transferred. It has a FICO score approval issue. Haven't run any issues with it at all. So, I mean, I've been seeing them and I look at a lot of them for the company. Have the seller contact the solar company for instructions in the transfer. Always make sure you do that. Do it as soon as possible because you don't want this to cause a delay in closing. Have the buyer contact the solar company for information about the system. Pretty basic. You notice I'm doing this on almost all of them. And then, of course, put the transfer documents to the title company. Now, here's where this changes on these power purchase agreements. And let me explain what a power purchase agreement is. A lot of people don't realize what that is. Basically, what you're doing is they're putting the equipment on the roof. The power that's generated from it goes to a private supplier, and then they turn around and sell it back to you. It's all transmitted through the Edison company. It's the internal agreements that they have. But somebody said, well, why is in place that during the first 5 years the solar systems are difficult? What these companies do is with a power purchase agreement, they they sit the credits. There's credits and for tax credits for the incentives for people to get to purchase these and put them on their property. The power purchase agreement company takes those incentives and they sell it to a third party. And that third party, it takes them 5 years to get all their credits back for tax purposes. So it's kind of a complex situation. And if you're trying to pay off one of these within the first 5 years, it's going to be extremely difficult. We did one here not probably about 8 or 9 months ago, and it was just absolutely crazy. And uh, it's unfortunately what happens with some of these is we're dealing with elderly people that don't understand what they're purchasing, and then maybe somebody passed away, and then the solar system issue comes into play. So you have to be extremely careful. But you will find that solar systems being placed on property historically will involve people that are older. And I'm not going to get into any discriminatory things. So the bottom line on it is there's an older individual and they have a tendency to not understand the contracts and then they end up getting themselves in some situations where they're actually acquiring more solar on the property than they should. At the end of the 5 years, the purchase agreement has a chart showing the payoff. The you will generally find that within the contract. So if you looked in the contract, you're generally it's towards the end of it where I normally see it, and it will say, okay, at the end of the 6th year, you can purchase it, and this is the dollar amount. And somebody said, well, can I do that on the lease, one of those leases? Yeah, the lease is a little bit different from the standpoint the lease says you can always pay it off, but if you pay it off, it would be the lease payments for the remaining time of the lease. So, in other words, if you tried to pay it off at the end of 10 years, you might have 15 years of lease payments you're paying in advance. So, for all practical reasons, there's probably no incentive on it. And if you look at these contracts, when you're looking at them, it doesn't make any difference. Power purchase agreement has an increase every year. Most of them is 2 to 3% a year. Leases historically do the same thing. And one needs to be real careful with this because I ran the numbers out on one of these systems and their rates are going up faster than the utility company rates are. So at some point, it may not be beneficial with a solar system to really be beneficial, but that's for future generations to deal with. Common issues with solar systems. Buyer not qualifying for a home loan for the solar payment. It's rare, but it could happen. And so you just have to be careful with it. If you send that paperwork over to the loan officer, he can tell you immediately. But we do have, some of our clients are really marginal nowadays, so it can be an ugly situation. So you want to be able to get away from it as soon as you can. And somebody said, well, I talked to my neighbor and his solar only cost $150. Well, in today's world, if it's a newer solar system, it's going to have a battery backup, and you're going to be, in most cases, up around $300 a month or more. But you could be less. It just depends. Listing agent at time of listing, not securing information involving the solar. In other words, that's a biggie. It's the most common thing I run into. They don't have the contract. The solar company went bankrupt. This is common. Somebody said, well, how common it is. It is really common. Most of these companies that are doing these, unless it's Sunrun or it's some major that's been around for a while, and it doesn't mean that they won't go bankrupt, but I would not anticipate it. Sunrun's huge. Tesla is all tied together with them. The we haven't had a lot of problems once we determined who is servicing who's servicing that contract. And then once we find that out, then we can move forward. The first place I really want you to look if you're dealing with one that went bankrupt is give Sunrun a call and see if they have it. Sunrun has been buying most of these companies that go bankrupt. What they do is they just simply go out, put the systems on the houses, grab the money up front, file bankruptcy within 3 years, and then that when they file bankruptcy, the system sold off for pennies on the dollar, and Sunrun comes along, purchases it, which good business decision on their part. And then part of these systems, some of them could be uh, not the best in the world. Some of these companies are questionable that are out there, and there's a lot of great companies out there, but some of them are really questionable. And then whoever buys it ends up having to start doing some work on the property because one of the main reasons that these companies go bankrupt is number one, they got the money up front, but more importantly, they want to kill the warranty program. These warranty programs can vary from Depending on what you have there, it can vary out. If it's an owned system, the warranty is going to have to be addressed. So you always, if you know it's an owned system, then have your client check with the solar company that has it currently and ask if the warranty is still in effect. But the other two systems that's not a big issue because they're lease systems or they're power purchase agreements. So everything's going to be maintained by a third party. Warranty issues is always going to be an issue. So just to understand that. Short sales and foreclosed properties with solar, they need to be paid off. So in other words, if you're working on a short sale, it's got solar on the property. If it's a short sale, if it's leased, it's not a problem. If it's a power agreement, it's not a problem. But you do have to understand on a short sale, the short sale lender is not going to pay off the solar system, and if it's a foreclosed property, they're not they're not going to get involved with it. So it needs to be paid off, especially if it's owned. The uh, the seller payment delinquent on a solar system. Somebody said, "Well, how does that happen?" Believe it or not, we've seen solar systems placed on properties. Solar company goes belly up somewhere in this paperwork, everything gets lost and nobody makes any payments. And then all of a sudden we're at a point where we're trying to deal with it. And then all of a sudden, all those back payments are going to have to be brought current. And so that is always going to be problematic. And so you need to get those payments current and make sure that they continue making payments. If you got a property in escrow, don't stop making the payments on the property unless, solar company give you instructions or somebody else give you instructions concerning that, because that's one of the things that they're going to ask for. The solar system is not transferred with this sale of the properties is always an issue, and it does happen. So what you need to do is when you go out to the property, you survey the property to see if any solar panels are on the property. And when you do that, then you know that you have a situation you have to address. And the other biggie, and this is a tough one, there's a lot of roof damage coming up and that's caused by installing companies. And what they do is it depends. I've looked at different contracts, and one will maybe 90 days. I've seen one that's 3 years. I've seen another one for five. Uh, if it's damaged by the installing company day one, of course, they're going to take care of that. But what happens is these people I don't know if you've ever watched anybody around on a roof of a house installing solar, but they're bouncing around and they're damaging tiles. And the problem with that is it creates leakage. And then another thing is where they're doing their anchoring, they in most cases are using a silicone base, and as time passes, as we know here in this, in the valley, that due to temperatures it can create problems. So I am starting to hear about these leaking going on and involving these roofs. If you have the buyer, I would recommend a roof inspection, but it's still problematic. Basically, the roofer is going to only be able to see what he can see, and underneath the panels unfortunately, he can't see those areas, but he can see where the anchoring is taking place, and might be able to alleviate some of that. Buyer intending to use property for rental use, this is problematic, and it's been done. So I'm not saying you can't do it, it's just problematic. And we don't recommend it, but it's strictly up to the purchaser. I mean, if he wants to take, deal with the solar and deal with the tenant, then they're more than happy to do that. Let's talk about the solar advisory and questionnaire, and go ahead and kick me to the next page. Should be showing up. Okay, thank you. Uh, here's, that's one thing interesting about over the years, especially working with contracts. You can't, these advisories are provide extremely good information, and they should be read by the agent. Then it creates a little better understanding for you that you understand. There's going to be several advisories. This one's put out by the California Association of Realtors. And then there's going to be one put out by the Solar Consumer Protection Guide, which is interesting. It's put out by the state of California. The first few years of it, they had nothing. That's where we still running a lot of problems with solar companies and so now they send out a booklet. It's probably 30 pages long. And you can look it up online, and the solar companies are now providing that booklet because I guess I don't know if because of legal actions or what's causing it, or it may be mandated now. But the thing of it is it's more reading than what most people will do. And so, and the customer should read them. Unfortunately, they don't. And then another thing that we see going on is the solar systems are being placed on the property, and then they're not hooked into the Edison company. And what you have to be careful with this is that you have to make sure that that system is connected. We have had clients, we seem to get them every year, especially involving the people in the lower income areas that have had solar placed on their properties, and they didn't fully understand how the process worked. And what they did is the solar system was placed on the property, the people got their money, took off, went bankrupt, solar system was never activated. And then we've assisted our clients in helping them with that. So if you're in a PG&E area or Edison, you want to make sure that that system is active, and you can pull an Edison bill and you can tell real quick or contact the Edison company and just make sure because that is has to be the Edison company has a 7-page document that has to be signed. It's just basically most of it's regulatory, and it's a lot of people say, "Well, why is the Edison company still involved?" Well, the Edison company is still involved. There's two ways. In other words, excess power can be sent back to these companies, and then you get a credit. And the state of California originally let you get it at a cheaper rate, but now they brought everybody to current rate. So all new solar systems being installed is based on a current rate. But the way that works is that the Edison company is still going to there will be a charge from it and PG&E, and because they're using their transmission lines. And so I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to go into 7 pages of the Edison company document. But the thing that you need to be aware of is there is an additional document that would need to be signed. So if you have the buyer of the property, they need to contact, at the close of escrow, they need to contact the Edison company. And when they contact the Edison company, they will forward the document to them for them to sign. So that will be taken care of that way. So that there's always something has to be done there. Now, just as a general information for you, there's one thing that you do have to have some awareness of if you're dealing with your client. There, the way the lease programs work, and they have what they call a true-up bill. The true-up bill is tied to the Edison company. The Edison company with the true-up bill is basically it can be done one of two ways. If you anticipate using so much power over what your solar panels will generate, you can do a monthly. You can say, okay, I'm going to pay an extra 120 bucks a month. Or you could do what they call a true up. At the end of 12 months, then you pay the difference. Somebody asked the question of me, we don't provide legal advice, but I mean, you're better off paying on a monthly basis than paying one at the end. I've a few years ago come in contact with somebody when we were dealing one of these, and he had $5,000, and he had swimming pools, and everybody was just having the time of their life, and had very small panel system for solar, and found out they had a very expensive bill to pay. So it can be done either way. I'm going to go ahead and kick me to the next page here, and then we're going to talk about this questionnaire. Down here in the questionnaire, there's some questions. It says solar property questionnaire. If above that section there's a little bit of disclaimer there. It's talking about the solar questionnaire. It's instructions. Basically, if you have the seller, it's what they know. If they know the answer, then they need to respond to it. So somebody said, well, I'll be honest with you, I don't particularly care for the format that they have here because I would prefer to see yes, no, or unknown. Or so, you have to be careful with these. And the customer needs to complete these on all these solar systems because we as a company don't want to get ourselves in a legal situation with these. This is really about the seller. This is about the buyer. We're just simply the facilitator trying to get the information pushed back and forth. And that's basically what we do. So let's talk about number one there. It says, are you aware of whether the property has multiple solar power systems? This is becoming a big deal because what's happening is if that solar system's been on that property 10 years, they probably have run into issues. And when they run into issues, these power companies come out and say, oh, well, we'll put another system up there. This thing's, turns into another sales pitch. And then all of a sudden you get another system. So you need to understand that. If there is two systems on the property, then you're going to have to complete two forms. In other words, you're going to have to do another separate form for each one of them. So it's important that you know that, and that's really where your obligation kind of, can get a little testy. You have to be careful with this. And so just understand if you have two systems, you have two systems, you're transferring them through escrow, then you have two of these. The the contract's going to tell you whether it's own, lease, or what. The customer should know it, but most customers we ran into, they don't even know they can't even find their documentation from when they put it on. So and then eventually they will. Keep insisting that you have to have a copy of the document and then have them with that document complete this form. Not you, but them. Complete it. They complete it to the best of their knowledge and then attach it to it. And then that pretty well clears you as much as possible. The approximate age of a solar system, they may know what it is or they hit unknown. Name of the installation companies has changed substantially. These companies have, about the Tesla and Sunrun is probably the most basic ones I see out there. There's other companies running around out there that I see all the time, but not as much as those. The documents Provide the documents. It says, if yes, provide any such documents in your possession to the buyer. So that's important. Provide it. That gets that disclosure out of the way and make sure it is the correct documents. It's not something that's been done at a later time. General request based on the seller's knowledge. There's where it's only based on their knowledge. Whether the solar power system provides power for only a portion of the property. And that would be unusual. The property they're talking about is could there be an additional building or structure where what it entails. Whether the house system is connected to a utility service, that would be generally always yes. Now, you could get in a mountainous area where there is no utility services and they would be impacted, but not normally. The If you see when you look at it, was yes, the date of installation connected service, and it just see it works your way right on through it. Go to the next page, please. So that's just general questions. The Whether any portion of the system is installed anywhere other than the roof, and that would be generally on the ground. We are seeing some of those systems, but not within the city. In the city, we're historically seeing them on the roof. It could be in outlying areas. I know Porterville's got some areas where they have enough room to install those, but it could be in Tulare, Visalia, Porterville, or up and down the valley. It just depends. But you'd have to have some information on it. And then under this particular section, it says under F, whether there is a maintenance agreement for the solar power system. That's important for the client to let everybody know. If there is one in place, then we have to deal with it. And then and the information has to be provided. Whether there's a warranty that covers the solar system, that's very important. And it under the G section there, it says, is the warranty transferable? The customer needs to find this information out. They need to call the solar company and find out what they have. Now, unfortunately, if they don't, then the buyer needs to ask the questions. So they need to find out. And then, of course, under 4, it's just talking about the solar system is owned or conveying the property. And then it's number 5 is all the things we've been talking about here is at least power purchase agreement, and then have your parties sign it. The company's taken the position that these new do need to be taken care of. So you need to have these solar agreements in play. You need to have a copy of them. You need to have these forms completed to the best of the client's knowledge. Sometimes the client will ask you questions. My recommendation is just refer them back to the power company that they're working with. Um, the information that I provided today is basically for your knowledge, your understanding, so you can help get your property transferred and most importantly, be able to go to closing on the property. Appreciate everybody coming on today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to give me a call. I'm more than happy to assist you. And everybody have a great day and let's put some deals together. Thank you.